Move into item 4. Public hearing, temporary moratorium on the issuance of demolition permits. Why are our lights flashing? We're not voting right now.
Not sure.
All right.
Keep going.
You're just anticipating that we're going to vote. Okay. Public hearing, temporary moratorium on the issuance of demolition permits for historic structures. Recommendation that City Council conduct a public hearing to consider the placement of a temporary moratorium on the issuance of demolition permits involving historic structures and structures built in 1916 or before. Vice President Spencer.
Yes, thank you, and I understand my colleagues were told why I wasn't here for our agenda conference or workshop. I was in Atlanta with a few thousand other stranded Delta Airlines travelers. So at that time, I understand there were questions about perhaps the quantity or the number of structures that may exist citywide that would fall under basically a designation of this historic structure. And at this time, our council executive is providing documentation, Council President, that should answer some of the questions that I understand were asked in my absence. And I'm about to receive the same handout.
Okay.
But, Council President, this action, this item tonight is something that I'm sponsoring as simply to serve as a bridge, most importantly during this time frame between when we as a council took action and directed our planning board to evaluate basically the integrity of our demolition application process, and then after if they determined that in fact it needed to be modified or strengthened, they will have up to 180 days. Well, I hope that they will present some of their opinions to us in order for us to take action within a 180-day period.
Any questions for Vice President Spencer? Councilwoman Canaway?
Yes, I just wanted to know if there were structures that individuals or have gotten building permits for or are in the process of selling that would be impacted by a 180-day moratorium. And so what happens to those individuals? If they've already gotten they're selling their property, they may fit the 1916 and before. What happens to those properties?
Vice President Spencer?
All right. I have not checked that sort of action or status. That would be something that really, if there is a pending sale, my assessment is that would be not anywhere within our city records, but would be found in an MLS with the Association of Realtors, and so I do not know that number. However,
this would not have an impact on any pending sales.
Well, it should not have any impact on a sale. However, that purchaser, if they have purchased a structure that has been built up to 1916 or previous to the year 1916, they may find that they are not able to demolish that building unless our building official deems that building to be so in a state of such disrepair that it poses a danger to the public. As I understand, this moratorium would not tie the hands of our building official from being able to issue a demolition permit. For instance, if during this 180-day period there was an event, say whether it be a natural event like a hurricane or a fire, certainly there may be the need to complete the demolition of a partially demolished and dangerous structure, and it's my understanding that this moratorium still provides the latitude for a building official to incorporate his or her thoughts about public safety and welfare.
Thank you.
Councilwoman Myers.
Yeah, well, I do support the action very much, and I appreciate Councilman Spencer for bringing this forward. And this has to do with demolition permits. It doesn't have to do with the sale of property. So I don't see this as...
You have a question, Councilwoman
Well,
Myers?
the question is about the recommendation. It says the city council conduct a public hearing to consider the placement of a temporary moratorium. So is this the public hearing?
It's going to be as soon as we get through questions.
Okay. Well, that was my question.
Okay. I do have a question, Councilman Spencer. I did not, or Vice President Spencer, I didn't see in the actual ordinance, I think we're doing this as an ordinance, the language that would allow the building department to take care of a structure that was deemed dangerous. I know that I've received emails, most of them supported, but some, at least one, pointed out that if it was a dangerous structure, there ought to be an ability to, demolish it. So I didn't see that in the ordinance, and I don't know, I would prefer to see something like that, but it's not in there, is it? That's my question.
No, and as I understand, the chief building official has that discretion.
Okay. Councilman Wingate.
Yeah, I had a question. Citywide, over 100 years old, there's 1,105 buildings. And I wouldn't think that all of those buildings that are that old have any historic significance to them. And I was hoping that Mr. Spencer could give me a response. Maybe I need to start over so he gets back.
That's a question?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. All 1,105 of these houses, I don't think have any significant historic significance. So they're tearing them down around town all the time.
That doesn't sound like a question. We're just in questions right now.
Well, Mr. President, maybe you can, maybe...
No, I'm asking, are all of these 1,105 buildings, do they have historic significance?
Okay. Vice President Spencer.
I apologize.
Yes.
And
Did you hear the question?
no, I certainly did not.
Could you please
Okay.
restate?
But I've got answers to other questions.
Okay. On your listing here of buildings over 100 years, there's 1,105 of those, and I'm asking, do they all have historic significance to the city of Pensacola?
Well, that all depends on how you define yourself as a historic preservationist. One end of the spectrum, fellow council member Wingate would say, absolutely, they have significance. I wouldn't want to tell my great-grandmother, who's over 100 years old, she doesn't have significance anymore. And really, at this point, this is to, again, provide Councilman Wingate, a bridge until the planning board refines or defines. If you will recall, we are describing historic not only using the empirical benchmark of a date of construction, but the significance of perhaps the individuals that lived, resided in structures, the events that may be associated with that structure or that neighborhood. So the planning board is tasked to broaden that definition of historic so that it does not just look simply at age. And this is not putting, in my opinion, this is not putting our city in some state of paralysis as far as redevelopment goes. And that's why I chose the 1916 benchmark as opposed to a 50-year benchmark, because I did canvass some of the development community and other individuals, as well as staunch historic preservationists, to choose a date, a milestone, that for this 180-day period, we could at least preserve what I consider to be healthy redevelopment and development in our community by choosing that 100-year benchmark. The planning board may come back to us with a recommendation of a different date, but for this time and tonight, I'm sitting here tonight seeking your support for a moratorium using the 100-year benchmark.
Okay.
And then I can comment on the other question or concern that you, Council President, expressed. And it's my understanding from our attorney that at the second reading, I can come back with an amendment with language that better describes what conditions involving risk, safety of the public that our building official can administer or process demolition permits.
Okay.
And I would like to do that.
Okay, I have another question. What would trigger the end of the moratorium? Because I'm concerned that we just put this in place. I know it says up to. I would like to get the response back from planning board and do whatever we're going to do if they give us a response. We may not like what their response is, but, I'd like to see some, resolution of this and not just set it at 180. I know it's up to, but what would, in your mind, would trigger the end to the moratorium?
I attended this week's planning board meeting. I don't know if any of our documentation that was handed out provides the results of that. They voted unanimously to support the moratorium. They also separated that to vote on action to immediately begin the task that we assigned them. I did share with them that time was of the essence, that while there was a 180-day period, that we would have to go through 2 readings in order to adopt an ordinance. So I think that what would trigger the end of this, and it would probably fall along the lines or the same evening, there would be an action item that terminates this moratorium, that this council would stop the moratorium, terminate the moratorium, and adopt at the second reading the demolition process.
Okay.
The revised demolition application process.
And your ordinance only affects those that are not in special districts, right?
Right. It didn't separate it. If you'll notice it defines it as citywide.
But I thought there was a clause in there that said it would not apply to.
We will still, the ARB will continue to do the review.
Right.
Of the structures in the protected districts.
Okay. So will the moratorium apply to those in the special districts in the ARBs?
I believe it will.
Okay. That was not clear in my reading. It seemed like they were excluded. So, and then this document that was handed out, the 1,105, does that include in the special districts too?
I believe it does.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
And perhaps 660, as I recall, approximately 660, and that data is not in here, but 660 are in those protected districts.
Okay. Councilwoman Candlewind?
Yes, Councilmember Spencer answered the question. I just wanted a refresher on what we were asking the planning board to do. I wanted to, Councilmember Wingate had mentioned historical significance of a building, so that the determination would just not be made by age, but also its importance to the neighborhood as well as its history.
Yes, you are correct.
All right.
Okay, Councilwoman Myers.
I was just wondering if there's been a motion and a second.
There doesn't need to be until after we have the public hearing.
Okay.
Councilman Tahar.
Yes, just a quick question for Councilman Spencer. Does this is, Councilman Spencer, this is all structures, correct? Commercial and residential?
Yes, it is.
Okay. Does this preclude someone from purchasing a commercial structure over 100 years and doing an interior demolition?
We did not stipulate whether, or differentiate exterior from interior.
Okay, because I don't want someone to buy it and intend to keep the historical structure, but maybe repurpose it or redo it or do some demolition on the inside for a future tenant or something and have them have to wait 180 days to do that. To me, interior or if they wanted to, again, I know a lot of stuff goes for the ARB where you have to go in and if you want to put new siding on the outside of a building, you have to get a demolition permit to take the siding down before you can put the new one up. That's all reviewed. I just don't want to slow down that process. I'm okay, I'd like to differentiate between that and the complete destruction of a facility. I don't know if we can do that at this late hour. I just don't want to impede someone from trying to do an interior demolition.
It's my understanding that that suggestion could be incorporated as an amendment at our second reading. You could choose to pass tonight's, and then if it does not, choose to pass or not support tonight's. But we all know it takes crossing the finish line 2 times.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Wu.
And I'll certainly take that under consideration. What I want to do, is to have the time to better define what the extent of that interior demolition may be. And
My continuation.
pledge to do that.
Councilman Wu.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. President. My comments are along the same line as Councilman Tahar. 2 buildings, for example, just north of Bank of Pensacola were completely redone with the exterior remaining the same. If the demolition is stated that there's no difference between interior and exterior, that would have delayed that project, and there might be some people who would lose their appetite for doing anything. And so, in the illustration I use at Florida State University, there's a dorm called Jenny Murphy Hall. And what they did is a very old structure, but it had very old wiring and poor insulation. They maintained the outer wall, went inside and completely gutted the building. And so when you walk inside the building, it's a brand new building, but from the outside, it looked the same way as it did when they originally built it. So I would encourage you to move on what Councilman Tahar wisely has brought to us, because on one hand, we want to have historical preservation, but on the other hand, we don't want to run away people who may develop things. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay.
Yes.
I have one final question. If I read this ordinance, it says, therefore be it ordained by the City of Pensacola, Florida, a temporary moratorium of no longer than 180 days from the date of the adoption of this
Item
ordinance.
B, I know where you're going.
Then letter B?
Right, shall be inapplicable to any
This
application.
moratorium shall be inapplicable to any application submitted that falls within a special review. What does that mean?
This would say no.
What that is relying on, the translation of that is that it is looking to the jurisdictional agency, or in this case, our Architectural Review Board, to determine and basically review an applicant's submission, which may include a demolition. And so it is still putting that responsibility, placing that responsibility on our Architectural Review Board.
Okay. This relates to my previous question when I asked, does it exclude those? And by reading that, it appears to exclude those in a special review district. That was my question. So.
Right.
Okay.
And I may, tonight, I'm choosing not to affect that, but I may seek a modification for that on the second reading.
Okay. All right. Seeing no other questions from council, we'll go to the public. Dan Lindeman.
My name is Dan Lindeman. I live at 300 West Blunt Street, and I've got property downtown. I'm a preservationist. I love Pensacola. I live in an old home. I've got some old buildings downtown. When I saw this come up, I'm assuming this was all precipitated by the Sunday House being demolished and the West Hill Taxi building being demolished. My concern is that the Sunday House, to me, was a home that should have been saved a long time ago. It got put into a state of disrepair to where it wasn't feasible to save the house. I talked to numerous architects throughout the city. They all felt the same way. The house should be torn down. The fabric of the neighborhood had already been destroyed. And what I worry about is that, I'll just call them derelict properties, houses that have been neglected for a long time, falling apart. Some guy comes in and wants to put in townhomes. It's contingent on buying property that's got a little shotgun house on it. Shotgun house, we've got thousands of them just like it in the neighborhood. It can't be destroyed because it's significant. It goes to the ARB, they say, no, can't tear it down. Can't do it. So this guy walks away when we've got a little house that nobody can afford to rebuild. Nobody. This is what really bothers me about this. When I was on the ARB, there was a home on 417 East Government Street. The city had brought the house to the ARB for demolition for code violations. The place was falling apart. ARB wouldn't let it be torn down because it could be salvaged. I believe the house was, the city issued a demolition/rebuild permit. The house was torn down. Guess what? The house isn't there anymore. So there's little ways you can get these little loopholes going. And that's what I want to make sure, that if this ordinance does come up, that the ARB is given strict instructions. If the city has deemed that this house is unsalvageable, is a danger, is a hazard, and maybe some way incorporate language that if it becomes cost prohibitive to anyone to renovate this home, that it's just not realistic. Like, I think that was the Sunday House case. It would have been unrealistic to try to save that home. It's sad that it got into that state, but it did. And that's what I worry about. So hopefully you can give me the assurance that if you do, Brian, bring this thing up, that there is a strong word in there that the city, the building official has authority over this if it's deemed unsafe, and that if there's some way to establish a cost basis on this, can it feasibly be refurbished? And then the other thing is, if the Sunday House, that whole block, contingent on one house being torn down to put in 27 townhomes, that's something else that you need to really think about. If it's one little home on a huge piece of dirt that's going to prevent the whole thing from being developed, I think we need to really think about this. And let these little homes, some of them got to go bye-bye. That's it.
Thank you, Mr. Lindeman. Vice President Spencer.
Thank you, and I want to express my appreciation for Dan coming up here and speaking. He's served as an ARB member, as a citizen volunteer. He has dealt with some of the praise, but more often criticism, that volunteers receive on our board. And may I encourage you, Dan, to participate in the planning board's process in their crafting of the demolition, the determination of what defines historic significance, as well as what other contributing factors may play a role in determining if a building is salvageable or how may it be relocated. I could tell from my participation at the planning board, those members are fully engaged in this. We have developers, architects. There's a good representation of cross-section of our citizens on that board. So, Dan, I think that's where your opinions will be very valued.
Thank you. Karen Kilpatrick. Welcome back, Ms. Kilpatrick.
Dan, I agree with you. There are a lot of rundown, ragged, not cost-effective little buildings that may be 100 years old. They may be 50 years old and have historical relevance to them, but you need to look at what does it mean to the city by historical. Has it contributed anything to the city? Who owned it? Did that person contribute anything historically to the city? We have some of the most beautiful beaches in the world. People come here for our beach. We need to be forward thinkers. We need to bring those people to our city also. We need to not just show them we have beautiful beaches. We have a beautiful city. We have a lot of history here in Pensacola. Everybody talks about our history in Pensacola. We're the oldest city established. So we need some forward thinkers. Let's build Pensacola up. We can still maintain our older historic sites, our buildings, whatever they may be, but if we don't start moving forward, Pensacola is just going to get left out, just like like I have been born and raised here. I feel like this city is 50 years behind the times. We need to get moving on this, people. City council members, I beg you to please bring this city up to where it needs to be, but also consider the historical sites, the historical buildings. But if we don't need... We have beaches, like I said, bring those people downtown. But downtown's changed a lot. I can remember when everybody moved away. I asked my dad, why is everybody moving away? Oh, well, there's nothing left downtown. Lerner's isn't here no more, Sears, Penny's, J.J. Newberry's. He used to be a soda jerk with E.W. Hopkins downtown. I mean, does everybody remember the people sitting in the heritage oak trees to try to save that tree and to try to save the milk bottle creamery downtown? I remember that. And what did we tear it down for? To build a road for people to come in, interstate. There are some things that do have to go, but we can save something from that. If we can't save the building, we can save something from it. And Mr. Wingate, you're right. Some of these buildings just need to be tore down, just like Dan said. They need to be tore down, and we need to move forward and move on. The Sunday House was a fine example of people ignoring it. Something could have happened with the Sunday House. Nobody did nothing until it was about to be tore down. Nobody brought up anything. So let's move forward. We need some forward thinkers. Get some young people involved in here. UWF, architects, whatever it takes. Please let's move this city forward. I have seen the same city skyline, and still Studer's changed our skyline with the baseball park. Thank you very much.
Teresa Hill. Welcome, Ms. Hill.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Hill, and I live at 412 West Gregory Street. The last time I was here, I told you a story of two houses. As you know, since the last meeting, one of those has been torn down, the John Sunday home. This home was under the umbrella of the ARB. The second home is at 422 West Gregory Street and is not currently protected by the ARB. It's not within the special district. It still does stand, but not for long. A demolition permit was issued just one day after the Belmont Neighborhood Association voted to write a letter of support for this moratorium. I am concerned that now these two houses tell us a different story, one in which we must address that there has been an uptick in demolitions. The kid has gotten into the cookie jar, as someone mentioned at the planning board the other day. And the vote last month to address an ordinance from the planning board is going to result in a flurry of these demolitions. We desperately need to protect our contributing structures while this ordinance is being drafted so that we can press pause on the destruction of the oldest settlement in America. While I agree that not every house is, able to be restored, I think there needs to be a review process that's more than a check in a box. Until we have that review process in place that is more than a check in the box, I think we need to step back, do a historical inventory of our city before at the 11th hour we realize that we are destroying one of the most famous architects in America's homestead. I have one more minute, so I'm just going to read to you two people that could not be here tonight asked me to state on their behalf. The first one is Pearl Perkins. She's from 1300 East Scott Street. Dear Mayor and Council, I am the great-great-granddaughter of John Sunday, and am speaking on behalf of my family, the Sunday descendants. The city needs to come up with a way to place these culturally significant structures on a historical registry in order to ensure they will not be demolished. In the meantime, I support the moratorium while we as a community put our heads together for a long-term solution to preserve these homes. Thank you for your service. I also have a brief letter from C.S. Satterwhite, who cannot be here as well. With proper planning and a clear review process, we could have saved the John Sunday house. Since that cannot happen, a beautiful legacy of John Sunday would be to protect other parts of our history from erasure. A temporary moratorium on demolitions, followed by a proper review process, can prevent these tragedies. If we truly value history, we have to protect it. Dolores Curry, president of the Belmont Association, sent you a letter in 2012. She has now passed away. I only have a couple seconds. We want to improve our neighborhood, but not at the cost of losing our homes to eminent domain or the ever-rising cost of city services.
Thank you, Ms. Hill. Robert Overton? Welcome.
Robert Overton, Executive Director of the University of West Florida Historic Trust, 120 Church Street. I wanted to get up and thank you for considering this moratorium. We support this. We think it's a great idea for everybody, as the young lady said, to step back, hit pause while we update the code, while we update the planning zoning commission, look and update those. We've had a process in this community for almost 60 years of, in certain areas, preserving historic structures, process that helps determine what can and what should be preserved, what should be demolished. That process is a little bit dated now. I think the opportunity to update those is a good idea, and so we support this as a temporary moratorium to sort of let everybody take a step back. The moratorium, I don't think, would cause any undue hardship to anybody. It would be beneficial to both those wanting to preserve the homes and both on those wanting to develop those properties, so they can all make sure that we're doing smart development. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Overton. Councilwoman Cannon-Lynn.
Yes,
Hold on,
I
Mr.
just had a
Overton.
question.
Hold on.
Hi, thank you, UWF, for all you do for historic preservation. You mentioned that certain areas UWF looks at as far as historical preservation. What are those areas?
When I talked about it's we as a community.
Right. What areas
trust.
does the trust look at?
We are involved very closely and we serve as advisors to the city's architectural review board. So there are those review districts. We work with those. We also, for anybody who asks, citizens help review individual structures within the city and the county too. But we primarily are working closely with your city staff to help keep the records of the historic structures in the review districts.
Okay, all right, thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Councilwoman Wu.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. First of all, I want to thank you and your staff for a fine job y'all do downtown. When people talk about economic development, somebody just mentioned the beaches and they are beautiful, but they lose track that how much that historic district brings and adds to tourism in our city. And the second thing is I wanted to thank you very much for your hospitality when the Northwest Florida League of Cities met here. I have not had a chance to do that because you've not been here, but now that you are, I want to say thank you. Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Omar Nagy. Welcome, Mr. Nagy.
My name is Omar Nagy. I'm a commercial real estate agent, and although I'm in favor of preservation, I do recognize the need to identify and to preserve historically and culturally significant properties. I do not think that a moratorium is the best path to preservation, especially based on one criteria. It's kind of arbitrary. Real quick, there could be a home that's 90 years old that we want to preserve that won't fall into this category. But most of all, I'm opposed because it can unfairly and negatively impact owners in the path of progress, especially in the west side, who could miss an opportunity, the price appreciation that exists in a market where developers are now moving towards and interested in purchasing properties from those owners. Those owners may not have any other asset and the house and that appreciation presents an opportunity for them to sell. Also, The 6 months in the real estate business the business that I'm in is cyclical. 6 months could mean a change in market conditions, change in interest rates, a change in opportunity for those who could otherwise benefit from the sale of their home to a developer home builder. It also discourage developers and home builders from moving into the area. So I do have a solution. There's data available, and it took me about 15 minutes to pull up 560 homes that are in the 32501 zip code that are 100 years or older. These are just residential properties. I say we identify the people, and here's the solution. Identify the homes, the structures, and we can reach out, a group can reach out and inform those owners about placing their home on the National Historic Registry. The benefits include matching grants, money that's available, tax credit that could give them the opportunity to improve their home or give someone else the opportunity to improve that home. So here are just a few examples. They could also request a first right of refusal on the homes that have been identified as historically significant.
Thank you, Mr. Nagy. Bev Perry.
Council members, Beverly Perry, 622 West Belmont Street. As a resident of a neighborhood that has no protections in place against the demolition of historic buildings, I'm in favor of a moratorium on demolitions. I would encourage you to include structures even less than 100 years old, as it is sometimes difficult to prove a building's age. Hopefully you will include the smaller structures, not just the historic landmarks like the recently lost John Sunday House. Blocks and blocks of worker houses were built on the skinny lots in parts of West Hill and Belmont Villas in the early 1900s. They've come to look like shotguns because kitchens and baths, which they didn't have originally, have been added, stretching all the way back on their lots, the lots that are 25 to 30 feet wide. Together, these places gave a character to the neighborhood. They're affordable, and they have good bones for renovation, hard pine floors, and they've withstood over 100 years of storms. They aren't landmarks usually, but saving such 100-year-old plus places shows our children that we value the lives and history of the people who live there, who may have worked at the port or businesses or industries downtown in the early 1900s. And these places housed people and families who helped build Pensacola. We need to find a balance between demolition for development and preserving neighborhood history. There seems to be enough already vacant land that could be developed. I'm very anxious about all the demolition occurring nearby, and I want to see more protections for my neighborhood. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Perry. Christian Wagley. Welcome, Mr. Wagley.
Good evening, Council. Christian Wagley, 801 East LaRua Street. I think, just the fact that we're having this discussion here this evening reflects actually some good news. And that good news is that cities are cool again. We spent really 70 years, ever since World War II, basically moving out of cities, vacating cities, redlining parts of cities where we couldn't actually, loans were not available to certain communities there. A lot of bad things happened. So now we're moving back to cities, and unfortunately we're losing some of our history along the way. And obviously, this is a community that talks a lot about history, about preserving history, and you have to save some of the physical pieces of that, I think, to make that viable, to truly be one of the first cities or America's first settlement. I think we've got to save some pieces of that. And I think many of us travel to places like Savannah and Charleston and the French Quarter, New Orleans, and we love those old buildings, and that really defines part of that city. And that happened through a very conscious effort that those cities made. Moratorium, and all we're talking about here is a temporary moratorium. I mean, I think that's the key term here, is temporary. This is a reasonable power of government. Government does this all the time. I know the city of Destin's considering a moratorium on tree permits right now, tree removal. So, governments do this all the time. It's perfectly reasonable, legal, and constitutional to do this if it is indeed temporary. And I think to have that discussion, if we can have up to those 6 months, to bring the community together, to bring the planning board together, to have this discussion about how far the community would want to go with this. And I hope that part of that will be, what could come out of this is some additional assistance provided by the city to people who do want to save historic structures, because it can be difficult, and that can be financial assistance, that can be technical assistance as well. But obviously, at this point in the discussion, it's simply having the time, is all we're asking for, the time to have that discussion before we continue to lose any more structures. So I hope that that's an easy choice for you, because all we're asking for is temporary. It's a little time to have the full discussion, and the community will then decide how far we want to carry this forward in terms of preservation. So, as always, thank you all for your service.
Thank you, Mr. Wagley. John Ellis. Welcome, Mr. Ellis.
Yes, thank you, Council. My name is John Ellis. I'm the Secretary for Belmont de Villiers, as well as the President for the John Sunday Society. Didn't really prepare any statements, just listening to the conversation. I think first and foremost, I'd like to volunteer to be a part of whatever task force is created, I guess working in conjunction with the Planning Board. I think to have a moratorium for the sake of just stopping demolition, that's not really our goal. I think the goal here would be to, identify historic properties, and I'd like to see, resources set aside. I mean, in Belmont de Villiers, we see a lot of properties that get in the condition that they're in, oftentimes because you have elderly folks or folks without means to preserve their property. So I'd like to see something done there where we can actually utilize some discretionary funds, maybe to help, an elderly woman replace the windows on her structure, say. And I'd also like to sort of spin the conversation a little. There's been a lot about, the development community and how this might affect them. But, in East Hill, as a real estate agent, my experience has been structures often get torn down because it's cheaper to buy a house to tear it down than it is to buy land. So what are you doing then to property owners who are owning vacant land if we're encouraging the demolition of structures? You're exerting downward pressure on the values of land. So I think, as far as this process goes, I hope to see it move forward. Certainly would like to be a part of it and bridge the gap between the preservation community as well as the development community. So thank you.
Mr. Ellis, stand by. I got a couple council members. Vice President Spencer.
Yes, and I want to thank John Ellis for his perseverance over the past several months in preserving the John Sunday House, but also I want to remind you that perseverance greatly heightened this entire community's awareness of vulnerability, the vulnerability of historic structures. Also, fellow council members as well as Mr. Ellis, I want to point out the planning board at the Wednesday meeting they have called a special meeting on August 25th to begin the task that we gave them. So if you attend that meeting, perhaps that's your best opportunity to participate in some degree or some level on a task force.
Thank you.
Okay. Councilman Wu.
Thank you, Mr. President. I also want to thank you for what you've done. Put a lot of effort into it, and I know you wonder, was it worth the effort? And I can assure it is, because we wouldn't be here discussing this had it not started with what you started back then. The other thing is, when you were talking about the elderly lady that needed help repairing the house, there's a program by federal government called CDBG, which is Community Development Block Grants. And I would encourage you and your friends, every year, Congress, in trying to find ways to save money, have been cutting CDBG grants. And I would encourage you to get the same folks mobilized to encourage Congress to increase it. Because what it does is it requires folks to hire people within that community to go do the repairs for folks who need repairs. So it's almost like a double bonus. A person getting the benefit of help that they need, but also somebody getting employment within that community to do a roof, fix a window, fix a door, whatever. So,
Sounds like a smart solution.
yeah, so it's CDBG, and I encourage you to try to get folks to get behind and push for it. More fighting. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Mr. Ellis. Terry Broughton? No? It's not Terry? Okay. Please state your name for the record.
Good evening. My name is Teníadé Tony Broughton,
Okay.
413 Fairfax Drive. I want to, thank you all for letting me speak to you this evening. I am a 10th generation Pensacolian. My family has been here since before the Civil War. Just tracing their history, I can tell you that they've been pushed around, moved around, flipped around in all kinds of ways because of things that we're trying to stop from happening tonight. Neighborhoods that have been destroyed, neighborhoods that have been burned, black folk having to leave downtown and lose their businesses, people even having to flee the city for their own safety, which is something that happened in my family. What I want you to know is that if you do not even consider this moratorium, what you're saying is that none of that is important to you. For so long, our history has been erased, relegated to mean nothing, to where our children don't even think that they have contributed anything to this city. When I tell them, look at the grounds, your great-great-grandfather probably made the bricks. But for you to not consider this temporary moratorium is saying that doesn't matter to you at all. The John Sunday House could have been saved. It never came before the council, and we could have talked it out then, but for you to not even consider this temporary moratorium says that even that's not important to you. What will you say to the little ones who want to be like you when they grow up? The decision makers, the policy makers. You're saying that we don't think you're important because we don't want to build a future for you. We want to erase your past. I sincerely hope that you consider passing this temporary moratorium so we can all step back and look at the valuable things that we have here, not just the John Sunday House that we lost, but other buildings that he created, the things named after prominent African Americans, stories that you don't even know of, that the people in our community speak of, the people who would, the surgeons who couldn't work in the hospitals, so they performed surgeries on people in their homes. These are wonderful stories that you're not even looking at. And if you take an opportunity to associate these people to these places, then you'll see the valuable things that we have. And I think it's almost sad that I have to come before you to plead to tell you that our story matters. But to not even consider this temporary moratorium is saying that you don't think it does. So I hope that you vote in favor of a temporary moratorium. Thank you.
Okay, hold on just a second. Councilwoman Myers.
Yes, I want to thank you so much for the powerful words you've just spoken. I've been concerned for a long time about the revitalization of the urban core CRA and the displacement of African American communities and people and cultures and history. So I hope that this will lead us into a much broader conversation about not just preserving structures, but preserving neighborhoods. And how do we deal with the impact of revitalization so that the people who've historically lived here actually benefit from revitalization? So I'm very happy that you have brought this issue up. I would love to have a further conversation with you. This is a great passion that I have. I grew up in a public housing project and poor neighborhoods in Montgomery, Alabama, and I saw what revitalization did to the neighborhoods that I grew up, some of it positive, but, you know, I wouldn't be able to afford to live in those neighborhoods now today. So this is a very great passion of mine. I want to see neighborhoods in this area preserved and the history of African-American neighborhoods preserved. So I would love to have a further conversation with you. So if you would be so kind to contact me or leave me your contact information. I assume we have it on your card. I'll get in touch with you.
Yes, ma'am. I'm Vice President of the John Sunday Society.
Pardon?
I'm Vice President of the John Sunday Society.
Okay.
And on Facebook, I'm Black Pensacola.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Hold on, just one more. Councilman Wu.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'm talking much too much tonight, and I'll try to make this my last comments. First of all, thank you for coming down and your passionate remarks. And I think one thing that struck me in what you said is you said there's not much to be remembered by. And I would say back to you one word, and that word is bricks. If it wasn't for blacks, Fort Pickens would not have been built. There are many, many, many black structures that were built by blacks. Their names are not on a plaque. Their names are nowhere to be found on the building. But a great majority of the bricks buildings were done by blacks. And I think that's something to be very proud of. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. Okay, that's all the cards we have, so we'll move into comments, discussion from council. Anyone have any comments?
Thank you, Council President. I feel like we have certainly aired some important questions. I hope that, again, that my colleagues recognize that this is one of two public hearings. I have taken some of the concerns that have been expressed seriously, and please do expect me to return with some modifications regarding most particularly dealing with structures that may have imminent collapse or, again, that pose danger to the public, and how our current building department can address that within the context of this moratorium. Also, I think it's important for everyone to recognize that the Planning Board did commit to an August 25th meeting. So I certainly hope that you have been convinced that this moratorium should be passed tonight.
Okay. Councilman Wingate.
Well, from sitting here listening, this seems to be so incomplete. I mean, we're talking about different pieces that need to be put in, and we don't have that now. We may have it sometime in the future. But if we do this first hearing and it gets by, and gets by the second one, you know, this will be our policy.
Okay. Vice President Spencer.
And again, I hope there's no ambiguity. It's my understanding that, and I look to our counsel, our legal counsel, that I respectfully disagree in terms of that perception that it is incomplete. That's what an amendment allows us to do. I'm not looking at coming back with 28 different points. It sounds to me like that we will be entertaining some language that differentiates interior and exterior demolition, as well as something that addresses the capacity of our building official to deal with processing a demolition permit in the situation in which a structure shows imminent collapse. So 2 items, and I've looked, Council President, for our city attorney to please remove whatever doubt that Councilman Wingate or other council members may have about this resolution.
Madam Attorney?
Council President, members of council, we are following the statutory procedures, and on second reading, it is permissible to present amendments and have them incorporated into the final version of the ordinance.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
I will comment, and I'm just not one to vote for a shell bill that will later be amended. I understand the intent, but at this point, it's just so vague to me, even the language that talks about special districts. I'm concerned about how that really applies. And I understand you're going to make amendments. You probably have the votes to pass it tonight. I may vote for it on second reading, but in its current format, I cannot vote for it. Councilwoman Cadwin.
Yes, I'm going to vote for it with looking forward to some of the amendments. I am looking forward for the opportunity for the planning board to really be able to define what a historic structure is, what are those limitations and boundaries, the property rights of individuals who own historical homes. So it's a lot of work that needs to be done before that we can get a true policy in reference to what historical homes are. I've been working with a historical home, the Ella Jordan House, that was built in 1890. And everyone has been telling us just to tear it down. You should just tear it down. It's not worth saving. And so when we look at, where some of our discretionary dollars go, we've been fighting the fight for the Ella Jordan House for 7 years. And we'll continue to fight that fight for historical preservation. But I do think that we do need time for some guidance, some guidelines, some definition, where we're going to go, and so those efforts also protect property owners, because if you designate a shotgun house or something that's historical nature there, it may take it out of the area where an individual can get repairs. I remember after Hurricane Ivan, and especially some of my areas, I was in District 6 at that time, and in some of my areas over there in the old historic East Hill area, there were homes that were historical in nature. There were people that could not get their repairs done because they had to bring that structure back to his historical significance. And so if you were an older person on a fixed income, it was almost impossible for you to do that. So there are some concerns that I have, and I hope that through the planning board process, many of those things can be addressed.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Okay, Councilwoman Myers.
Yes, I'm going to support it, and I strongly urge council to support it. It's a first step, and I do think there should be some minor tweakings to it. And I'm sure that Councilman Spencer will bring back a few amendments to it to clarify a few points. But I don't want to delay this. I think we need to get moving on this. We have the momentum. We've clearly heard it expressed here tonight, and I've gotten over 1,000 emails regarding the John Sunday House. This community is ready to move forward on this and to address this issue. So the fact that there may be a few amendments that I would like to see that Mr. Spencer is aware of, because he's already addressed some of them. I urge council to vote for this and to go on record that we support the preservation of older neighborhoods and the structures that mark important historical events in this city. Thank you.
Madam Attorney, do you have another comment?
Thank you, Council President, members of council. Just to clarify, the amendments will be scope and then the exception. The details will be developed by the planning board. So the amendments are going to be very specific, and I will be happy to prepare those.
Okay. Seeing no further comment, please vote.
Do we have a
Oh, wait, we're on
motion?
motion. We need a motion.
Just a moment.
Okay.
Okay.
Hold on.
Machines fell asleep.
Okay. Go ahead.
Hold on. No? Okay. Motion? We have a motion and a second. Okay, seeing no further comment, please vote. Passes 6-2. Okay. So, Madam Clerk.
Proposed ordinance number 41-16, an ordinance imposing a temporary moratorium on the issuance of demolition permits for historic structures as defined in the Land Development Code, as well as any structure built in 1916 or prior within the city of Pensacola, Florida, providing for severability, repealing clause, providing an effective date.
Okay, I need a motion and a second. I have a motion and a second. Seeing no comments, please vote. Passes 6-2. Okay.